Welcome back to our second session with the topic Rural but Plural, Migration and Belonging in Rural Areas. For this panel, we are expecting three panelists: Bettina Bock from Wageningen University, Blanca Casares from the European Association for Innovation in Local Development, and from Tokyo, Sebastian Polak-Rottmann from German Institute for Japanese Studies. So very international. I will briefly introduce the three speakers and give them, after this, the opportunity to comment, as we had this in the session before, the two questions. The questions are, the first question: how are migration and demographic change, especially youth out-migration, masculinization of rural areas, fast aging, and so on, reshaping the cultural and social life of rural regions in Europe? The second question was, what practical approaches can strengthen belonging and participation in areas experiencing population and demographic diversity? Each panelist will have 3 to 5 minutes for each question, followed by a moderated discussion, as we had this before. First of all, we will hear the answers from Bettina Bock. She is professor of inclusive rural development at the Wageningen University in the Netherlands. She is one of the best-known rural sociologists and focuses on the differentiation of rural areas with gentrification, population decline. Also, marginalization is one of her topics. As in my own work, addressing these issues leads to the questions of what role civic engagement and social innovation play as instruments for maintaining quality of life. She is also interested in the topics of mobility and migration. We are very pleased to have Bettina Bock with us today. Next, Blanca Casares. She is policy expert and project manager at the European, Association for Innovation in Local Development. Sorry for that, not so easy. Blanca holds a bachelor degree in environmental science and a master's degree in territorial rural development. Blanca started her career in 2011 at the Spanish Ministry of Environment and Rural and also Marine. Her expertise includes rural development, agriculture, and food systems in the EU. In 2020, Blanca joined the AEIDL team, where she works as a policy expert and project manager, most of all for Horizon projects. And when I'm right, Bettina and Blanca are working together in a Horizon or in a project. It's called Grass Ceiling. Maybe we'll hear a little bit more about this. I'm looking forward. Last but not least, Sebastian Polak-Rottmann is with us since 2022 and 2025. He is a research assistant at the German Institute for Japanese Studies in Tokyo. Sebastian holds a bachelor degree in political science and a bachelor degree in Japanese studies from the University of Vienna. He also has a master's degree from the University of Vienna in Japanese studies. Sebastian's research focuses on subjective well-being, political participation, and rural Japan. Most recently, sorry for saying this, but I'm very proud that Sebastian and I published a magazine on communicative places with our Japanese colleagues. So first of all, I would like to head over to Bettina, then to Blanca, and then to Sebastian, starting with the first question.
Thank you very much, Claudia, also for the nice introduction. So I would like to, let's start by saying that when we talk about migration and demographic change, that there is a huge diversity among rural areas. So there are rural areas where we do experience a lot of out-migration of youth, and also women or particular girls, but there are also other areas where that is far less the case. Certainly when you talk about the Netherlands and then rural areas which are in the neighborhood of cities, we see actually quite a lot of immigration of newcomers who move into rural areas because of the higher quality of life. So there also demographics change, and some would say they change favorably, but it does affect the cultural and social life of rural areas. And whether or not you find that positive depends also on your perspective. It's most problematic in rural areas where we see young people leaving without newcomers entering. So that are specific areas, and I'm quite sure Blanca will refer to inner Spain, where we see that happening. But I also know from Italy, where they even talk about their what they call the inverno demografico, so a demographic winter, where you see a lot of young people moving out and aging continuing. We have that also in the Netherlands in the relatively more remote regions, but it's really a different phenomenon from southern inner Italy, and I would also, as far as I know, also from Spain and from Tokyo. What is also important to take into account that the causalities differ. So in many cases, young people leave for education, but might come back. So there are regions in the Netherlands where we know that young people would actually like to stay or like to come back, but have difficulty to access affordable housing. So there is a different causality in terms of why you would want to leave. It's not because there is nothing to stay for, but it's actually very difficult to return. Aging can be caused by young people leaving, but is also in many more accessible rural areas caused by elderly newcomers coming in. Again, it's a different phenomenon, and we need, when considering what is problematic and when considering how to address problems, we need to take these causes into account. And I think another point which is important to consider is that how migration takes place might differ across individual life stages. And that is, again, important to take into account if you want to look into the second question. So if people leave when they are young because they want to go to higher education or they want to have an adventurous life in the city, but would like to come back when they start a family, that offers different opportunities for policymakers to support coming back. And the final point I wanted to make is that what has not been mentioned in the question is that we actually see also quite some demographic change due to labor migration and the entry of refugees. And they are statistically very often not visible, but they are there. They are inhabitants of rural areas with specific needs, and also how they are welcomed differs and also creates opportunities or problems, but they have not been, so you refer to youth migration, masculinization, aging, but that is another factor of another aspect of demographic change. I didn't talk a lot about masculinization. I think it will come back in Blanca's and most probably also when we talk about Sebastian. It is mainly, as far as I know, mainly a problem more towards the east and probably the south, and also in some areas of the north, but not so much in in Western or in the more urbanized, smaller European countries, we don't see that as a clear phenomenon. That my first answer to the first question.
Bettina, thank you so much. I would like to hand over immediately to Blanca and the first question.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for having me today. Regarding the first question, I completely agree with Bettina. Demographic change, the net migration or population dynamics, particularly the youth out migration, especially by women with higher level of education, make more prominent the masculinization in rural areas. I'm sure we will have time to discuss later the distribution of masculinization in Europe, and also other causes like the sectors that are more prominent in the rural areas in Europe, but also aging. And these phenomena are deeply reshaping Europe rural regions. Our work in Brazil, but also in other projects, shows that this is not only affect the labor market, but also alters community dynamics and social cohesion. In particular, the absence of women reduce local entrepreneurship, civic engagement, and the vitality of the community life. What we see is with women, they are not only individual projects, but they are community projects, and this has an implication for rural life. For example, crossing maps or data from Eurostat and EU sources, for instance, the innovation performance with the female achievement index and the total population change, we see a clear path. The regions in the EU with higher gender equality show a stronger innovation performance and also population growth, and highlighting here the clear path of inclusion, competitiveness, and territorial vitality. And this, the data shows clearly. Where women choose to stay or return, however, they become key agents of rural revitalization, funding social, ecological enterprises, diversifying farm activities, and maintaining community care networks. Their innovations often balance income generation with environmental stewardship and social cohesion, somehow helping the calls for the freedom to stay in rural Europe. At the same time, I would like to add demographic decline and masculinization lead to cultural narrowing. Traditional gender norms persist and institutions remain male-dominated. Yet new forms and participation often led by women and youth through living labs, community-led local development, through leader initiatives, for example, via the Common Agricultural Policy, are bringing more inclusive and creative governance models that reflect this demographic diversity. Just to conclude, migration and demographic change are fragmenting traditional social structures, but also opening spaces for new forms of community-driven, gender-aware innovations that redefine the cultural and also the social fabric in rural Europe.
Thank you so much. And Sebastian, what time is it in Tokyo?
Yeah, thank you very much, Claudia, for the nice introduction, and good evening from Tokyo. It's now close to 11 p.m. So already we could say good night. Well,
thank you for being here.
No, it's my great pleasure to be here and to discuss with you these very important topics. So I'm not going to talk about Europe or European communities, but rather about Japan. And as you probably know, since many of you are experts on demography, Japan has been experiencing a huge demographic change in the previous decades, and especially the rural areas, have been declining in terms of population since the 1960s. So quite early on already. So, and although this kind of process has been going on, there has not been much migration from outside the country to Japan. So when we talk about migration patterns, we talk about urban to rural migration, or the other way around, which is much more common, as you might imagine. However, Japanese scholars, and I like that perspective quite well, is that they do not perceive this kind of demographic change necessarily as something that destroys community life, but it disrupts it. So it's some kind of persistent disruptive stressor to these communities. So they are increasingly being challenged, but not all of them are necessarily being destroyed. And this makes me conceive them as some kind of dynamic space. And I'm going to talk a bit about why I think, or why I deal them as something that is a dynamic space, actually. So we can see that in the community. So I'm a qualitative researcher doing fieldwork in several rural areas in Japan. And these communities usually have about half of the population which is aged 65 or older, and this is the average, right? So if you go into the hamlets in the mountains, it's 70, 80, or even 100%. So it's a different situation than in many other parts of the country, such as Tokyo, where I'm just right now living in. However, so these kind of changes already also changed the community life. So we can see that former organizations that were like prominent in most parts of the country, like women's associations or elderly citizen clubs and so on and so forth, which played a huge role in the post-war era of the country, they ceased to exist in many places. So they have been disappearing. But that does not mean that there are not any kind of gathering places anymore. What is quite interesting is that especially in these areas where we have a high percentage of people aged 65 or older, new places, new gathering places, or new opportunities to meet each other emerge. So the local population and also the authorities think of ways to cope with that situation. And they offer programs of social welfare, for example, where older adults can meet regularly and have a good life and have fun. And they even say they did not have this kind of opportunities back in the past, but now they have a lot of activities going on in their small hamlets. And so that's why I would like to show you that's two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, we have the situation which is quite difficult for the local economy, of course, but on the other hand, those who still live there or are living there find themselves now in a completely different environment where the local authorities and the local people try to make the best out of it. And these gaps also attract other people, younger people from the urban centers of the country, something similar as probably also Blanca just mentioned. So it also has it also opens up the field for people who did not have much to say in these very conservative communities sometimes. So it's younger people from the cities who move there, or it's local women who suddenly appear in leading positions that formerly were occupied by mostly older men who are now not able anymore, not willing anymore to perform all of those functions. And these, as I said, these organizations cease to exist. So new organizations appear and new people start like redefining rurality or rural lifeways in these areas. So that's it for now, but I think we're going to talk about some of these aspects in the next question as well. So I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for this short insight of Japanese rural area, and thank you very much for this positive view. Just come back to the second question. I will show it up to you. What practical approaches can strengthen belonging and participation in areas who suffer from depopulation and demographic diversity? Thank you so much. Maybe starting again with Bettina.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's very interesting what Sebastian said, how demographic change also offers opportunities. And I see that in many places where you see all kind of civic initiatives starting, often in a response to services that are disappearing, often also as a kind of a defense mechanism to make sure that rural life communities are maintained, that you have a village hall, or that you take care of transport. All kind of things that disappear very often encourage such initiatives. And they are interesting in many respects. Interesting because they manage to find new solutions. So when it comes to social and healthcare, for instance, we see quite a lot of healthcare innovation, which is also very, very interesting for formal healthcare more in general. And I'm actually at the moment in a different or another project, Cerigo, which looks into the opportunities that social economies and social innovation offer to support the vitality of rural areas. And we see lots of those initiatives, and we see that they, some villages, citizens are really, really developing fabulous capabilities and capacities to develop these new solutions when they function well. Also, that happens also in collaboration with formal institutes. So then they are supported by municipalities or supported by formal healthcare providers. And actually that collaboration and support is crucial for their success. So they're really, really very nice examples in solving this kind of problems that occur when services are not maintained. They are also very, very effective in supporting belonging. And I always like to refer to Hartmut Rosa's idea of resonance. And you see that this kind of engagement and being of significance, gaining a new significance, is very important also for people to feel alive, to stay engaged, and to build vital communities. All that is happening, and it's important, and it's great. But it doesn't happen everywhere, and it does need support and recognition. And it has to do, and it's very difficult. So it's relatively easy to study this kind of initiatives when they are there. It's very difficult where they are not. So the absence thereof is very difficult to study, also for practical reasons, because where to start? My hypothesis, and also based at least in anecdotal experience, is that when everything has disappeared, it's very difficult to start these community initiatives. So then it's a bit like like skating on thin ice. It's maybe a very Dutch example, but then it's very difficult to find the courage, to find the people, to find the point where to meet and to start something new. And I think that is where governments at various levels and formal institutions have a huge responsibility to not only praise such initiatives, which they often do, and they say, oh, you're doing so great, and then relax and don't do anything, but step forward and take the responsibility to create the opportunities and the conditions for such initiatives to not only start, but also to continue, because that is where it takes quite a lot of support also to continue. And here we come back to the problem of youth immigration, because a lot of these initiatives depend on people in my age and older, and they can do it, let's say, and some people continue into their 80s, but have difficulty to hand it over to younger people because they have sometimes left. So there is also young people are important because they it's much more fun, and because they're important also for services to have clients, but they are also the active citizens of tomorrow, and they are the key agents for rural vitalization in the next 10 years, I would even say. So that is something important where the two are linked together. And I will stop. Thank you.
Bettina, thank you so much. In my own experience from fieldworks for several years, I would say this is totally right. If there's no infrastructure, if there's no, if there are no resources in this community, nobody jumps off from the sofa and says, yes, let's do it. So we see civil society is going down. Thank you so much. It's not my place to talk today. So Blanca, please, would like to hear your answer to question 2.
Yeah, well, in terms of strengthening belonging, as Bettina said, it requires a combination of different factors. We see really important the governance, the multi-level inclusive governance, because as we have already mentioned in the previous answers from Sebastian and Bettina and myself, is a multidimensional challenge. We have the decline of the population, the migration, but there is at the same time the personal decisions of changing a place to live, but there is a lack of infrastructures, a lack of services, employment, a series of elements that requires this multi-level governance, because it's not only a challenge at local level for local decision makers, it goes for sure at regional level, but even at national level. And some of the approaches that I will now explain is establishing these strategies that sometimes go to the level of national, but needs to go until the local level, have an impact in the local level, but with all the dimensions. I believe that belongings grow when people feel seen, value, and able to co-create the future of their territory. And then starting from zero is quite difficult. We need to keep people there to be able to feel seen, value, and with the capability to co-create together. And I will say it's a mix of inclusive governance, social innovation, and inclusive renewal. Really important, the cultural change and the visibility, challenging stereotypes and promoting women leadership in rural sectors helps to reshape the local narratives and strengthen the identity. One of the important things for any approach that public-private sector wants to address is the need of data. Data to understand these differences, because different rural areas are different in the same region, in the same country, in different countries in the EU, and of course abroad, but also depending on the age of the population living in this rural area, the level of education. There are quite a lot of differences and intersectionality in the rural areas that we need to be able to understand the tendencies, the reasons, to finally design policies that are reflecting the reality. And then, as I said, it's a multi-level for me governance. We see some regions and member states that has developed the population strategies, sometimes at national level, the brain drain strategies, rural smart strategies, but needs to align all the needs, but having a national perspective. And this will help all this availability of data to any kind of ex-ante analysis for policy design of, for example, the upcoming national regional partnership plans that will be the form of the upcoming programming period 2028-2034 in Europe, to have national plans with the different, with common agricultural policy, cohesion, innovation, research, all under the same plan. But for that, ex-ante analysis are quite important. I want to just bring to the discussion the successful of some approaches like community-led initiatives, the leader or community-led innovation under common agricultural policy, or even the living labs in the research projects that create these participatory spaces where local people and groups like women, youth, migrants can co-design solutions. Really important, we have seen in Brazil in living labs, for example, the peer-led networks or the mentoring, the mutual learning empower underrepresented groups and build confidence and foster collaboration. A crucial approach for me is the public investment, targeted investments to infrastructure and services. I'm thinking in women, gender and care sensitive infrastructures that allows, as Bettina said, to return people that want to return to the area, access to childcare, healthcare, housing, digital connectivity, etc. And just to finalize, a couple of things more within these plans, these strategies. And for example, we know for the upcoming national regional partnership plans, these will include national coordination committees and national monitoring committees to track 7 years of the public subsidy of these plans. These groups, these committees needs representation of these key groups in rural areas. And just to finalize, the digital tools that unlock some access to market, training, networks, and so on, always designed to be inclusive and to be a tool to facilitate the activity, but it's quite important, I think, as a barrier that we have mapped in the project.
Thank you so much. Back to Japan.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I really liked both Bettina's and Blanca's comments, which already covered a lot of the things that I also actually wanted to address. So I'm going more towards a spatial aspect of the approaches that could strengthen belonging. I think so far as what I have seen from the examples of rural Japan is that you need to create certain spaces that enable communication, and you also, on the other hand, need the administration to support these spaces. And what is important about these spaces is that in a hamlet or in a municipality that whose population is declining, whose like traditional, so to speak, meeting places have been eroding, where there are a lot of empty houses in the neighborhoods, and you don't have any neighbors anymore because all of them moved away or died. So what kind of communities is there still? So you need new places. You probably need to redefine the locality also of your neighborhood to find enough people to create a new neighborhood or to create a new meeting space, and so on and so forth. And what is interesting about the efforts that have been going on in Japan recently is that these meeting places or these places of communication tend to integrate a diversity of stakeholders now, of many, many people that previously had the feeling they did not have any say in local communities. So these, what we call communicative spaces, also open up the floor for different perspectives. And it is very important that the local administration, as I said, and as the others also pointed out, that they support this kind of places, that they provide these localities where people can meet on more or less neutral ground, because they can then identify ideas that might in the end turn out to be a very good policy for the whole area. And that happened actually in many municipalities in Japan. So for example, one municipality started a daycare program just by themselves because they had an bottom-up initiative to some kind of create self-governing entities. And they more or less run the whole small hamlet and made events and so on and so forth. And they got older and older and older. And then they found, well, we need something to take care of ourselves by ourselves. And then the local administration supported it at first, and then they thought, well, let's do the same thing in the whole municipality, not only in that small part of the village, but the whole village. And now that has been going on for many, many years. And we can see similar stories or similar examples elsewhere. So I think what is important to sum up my comment for these practical approaches to strength and belonging is to provide these spaces, but also to have people and the administration to support them and to integrate a diverse set of stakeholders, because those that have been living there for a long time and those that, if you only have that one perspective, it won't change much, because that are the people that have been there for a long time, and that's exactly the population that has been declining there. So you need new perspectives for these kind of ideas, and that's what we can already see from or learn from many examples in Japan, as I believe. And I think so what Bettina said about that it needs certain people who actually take the initiative, who actually say, let's do that, and who are still quite young, because if they are old themselves, it won't last for too long. So I definitely support that that argument, and I can see similar things in Japan actually as well. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for the further discussion now.
Thank you so much to Bettina, Blanca, and Sebastian for these great inputs. Maybe there might some questions coming up from the audience. So please feel free to raise your hand or to speak or to write something in the chat. Maybe there is a comment from Bettina or Blanca to Sebastian's input. There's enough time, actually. Bettina,
Maybe,
please.
yeah, maybe what I see is that it's actually often somewhat older people who take the initiative. Also often also because they have more time, so they could be retired, for instance, and sometimes have good relations or experience from what they did before. And it's often initially separate from what young people do, who would engage, from, I don't know, in supporting in the football club or this or the carnival, or more the different kind of activities. Also because a lot of the initiatives are in first instance directed towards what is what are supposed vulnerable elderly people in need of help and assistance. But I do see some I see people taking efforts to include young people. It's not always easy, because these traditional activities also not always very attract their attention at first. But housing is a very important issue that also is in the interest of young people. And we see, for instance, young people organize, or we have villages in the Netherlands where they build houses. And if they build houses also for young people or together with young people, you get immediately a connection, because that's in their immediate interest. And that is also what they get excited about. So I think the solidarity between young and old is very important, not always easy to arrange. And it's basically the I think most difficult group to get into is between 30 and 50, because they are so busy with their own careers and their own families that they don't spend a lot of time in, because it requires quite a lot of time, these kind of new initiatives. It's not something you do easily next to a lot of jobs in family care.
Yes, I have a question for Sebastian, but also I would like to answer somehow a question from the chat that I see from Abebab on interest to learn people's migration in your areas from rural areas. And help me a little bit with the comment before of the need of data as availability of data or indicators. The net migration indicator measures the difference between the number of immigrants entering a region, also coming from other areas of Europe, and the number of immigrants leaving the area, the region. It means, net population that at the end is in the area. And we have a difficulty to understand this, your question, no? Migration from rural areas to urban, or even in the opposite side, is quite difficult because we have the perspective of the net migration in the region. And it makes it difficult to understand really the tendencies or cross-check with other indicators like availability of infrastructure, services, educational level, and any other. And for Sebastian, for me, it was quite interesting to hear about the communication spaces that somehow are, I understand, supported by public initiatives. I would like to know a little bit more, for example, if are under specific thematics. We have in Europe the ACIs are multi-actor structures for agricultural knowledge and innovation systems for sharing space for sharing innovation in agriculture. But I don't know, Sebastian, if these communication spaces are thematically defined or all kind of topics.
Sebastian, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So it depends. There's a huge variety of these spaces, but I give it just one very concrete example. What we can find all over Japan now, there is the idea of community-based integrated care. So since the share of the older adults is rising within the population, especially in rural areas, there is, of course, the question of how to care for them once they need care, right? So, and the Japanese communities by themselves have designed some ideas where they say, well, it's not just the individual that cares for themselves, but it's actually the whole community that should look after each other. So if you see at your neighbor that the newspapers are piling up, maybe you should knock at their door and see if they are okay and so on. So that kind of thinking has been promoted by some local communities or local governments even, and now it's like nationwide. There is a policy for that. And one part of that policy actually says we should make meeting places for people because that prevents them from getting dementia and so on and so forth, because they understood that even sometimes more than the physical abilities, they should have places for social exchange because it strengthens the whole community. And you know, Japan is a country also with many earthquakes and so on. So it's the community can answer these needs very quickly. So if there is an earthquake and something happens, Japan is famous for the local community, which very quickly can assess the damage and what is needed and so on and so forth. So they understood that they need these places. And now they have been designing them as part of that policy initiative throughout rural areas in Japan. And they are located at completely different buildings. Sometimes it's a building next to a local shrine. Sometimes it's a community house. Sometimes it's an abandoned building, an abandoned school, for example, that had to close because there are no children anymore. And they use that school for cooking together or for like doing some exercises. Or sometimes it's a day-long program where they are doing all kinds of stuff, inviting also children from the vicinity, if there are still some, or younger people Sometimes they cooperate with instructors who show them some very interesting like games or as a physical games, or also they watch a movie together and so on and so forth. And they're doing it really like nationwide. But in the end, the community decides of how to actually do them, how to actually like what kind of program they would like to have, at which place they would like to do it. And if they choose to do it, then they get support from the government. So we can see these kind of efforts now emerging in Japan. And I think it's by this year that actually each municipality should have one place that manages this kind of activity. So it has been ongoing for several years, and you can see it everywhere if you go to the countryside and know where to look at, for example. That's just one example of that.
Thank you so much. We have some minutes left, so any questions? Enda.
There is,
Please.
thank you all, but there is one question in the chat, so we don't overlook. I would like to read it. It is from Rahendra Noipane. I hope I didn't too Germanize your last name. I was close. While using local resources, knowledge, and culture for innovation, the insights we have gained from research and recommendations we have provided for sustainable development can certainly bring change. However, local and federal governments in the country show little interest in such complex issues. How can we raise their awareness? I think it's more related to what we do, actually. Yeah, the communication, the exchange between science and local and national government. So do you have answers, Blanca, Bettina, Sebastian, maybe examples also? You already provided examples.
Maybe if I refer to the Netherlands, because what I see in the question is the idea that the national governments are more interested in urban development, prioritizing investment in urban areas. And that is true also for the Netherlands, I would say, also because with the idea that there are more people living, more voters living, so there seems to be more political interest also to satisfy their needs. But we see that changing, and that change is related to climate change, into the importance of rural areas to counteract or to deal with climate change, with water issues, with air issues. Also, that's maybe typical in the Netherlands, also for housing. So we have a shortage of housing, and these cities are expanding. And of course, the Netherlands has a huge scarcity of land. And so next to climate change and the need for deal with that in terms of flooding or shortage of water and clean air and clean soil, we see also now a change with the idea of security. So rural areas offer also space for food safety, food security, one issue, but also space for military exercises, place for the army. And I see that not only in the Netherlands, I see that certainly also in Norway, Sweden, Finland. So all kind of anxieties about border regions, which are often rural. So there is, and that's maybe the only advantage of this, a slowly coming recognition of the national relevance of investing in rural areas. So whereas for a long time, the rural seemed to be something, okay, yeah, we have farming and there's a lot of investment in agriculture. It slowly changes also for sustainable energy production. So the discourse is somewhat changing, bringing more to the fore how important it could be for the country as a whole to invest in rural areas. Not so much for the people in rural areas, but for the general interest. And that is, it's offering opportunities. Let's put it that way.
Thank you so much. Keep the fingers crossed. Hill has a question.
Thank you very much. I made quite a few typos in my text in the chat box, so then I thought I'm going to ask a question. So absolutely interesting discussion on this rural vitalization and also urban-rural migration. I just wanted to learn more about the different rural areas. So I just background is here as follows. So I'm based in Scotland. So we have remote areas. So these are highlands and islands, and then we have the accessible rural areas, which are still not always at commuting distance from the big cities, but nowadays, as we have more flexible working opportunities, also then they are kind of commuting within commuting areas at least few times a week for people who are working in offices. So I assume in the Netherlands, of course, Netherlands is small, but there are still, I'm sorry, I'm just taking maybe extreme examples, but Frisian Islands, for example, and if we go to Japan, so we speak about Hokkaido and northern part of Hokkaido and so on. So what is happening in those areas? If I understand correctly, we focus more on maybe accessible areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Blanca, you would like to answer to the question of Hill, or?
Yeah, was from the previous question from Rajendra. I think it's true that local, federal, regional governments maybe it's not a little interest in complex issues. Is sometimes normally they work in silos with really fragmenting competencies, real legal fragmenting competencies. And where we are speaking about rural vitality, rural sustainability, we need to take into consideration all social aspects, employment, health, education, agriculture. Then sometimes is a problem of how the governance is articulated and the competencies in the legal basis are distributed. The lack of data, as I said, is quite important. I think from research project, it's important to foreseen in the project the policy work. Means we will be developing some research for 2, 3, 4 years, but translating as much as possible to policy recommendations, and also following the policy development. If at EU level, at national, regional, there are some consultations where we can submit our findings, we need to be aware of all these processes, because they are really real opportunities to send amendments with the findings. Sometimes we see in sometimes through the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP networks, there are some working groups ongoing in the ministries that normally deal with rural development, where we can be part as organizations, research think tanks, and we can follow a little bit the process and advocate for these holistic strategies like the population, because there we are trying to tackle different aspects of the situation of rural areas.
Thank you so much, Blanca. Maybe Sebastian?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think in Japan, for example, we have a lot of small islands which are quite remote, and the urban migrants play a crucial role sometimes in actually like reframing the image of these very remote islands, which actually really sometimes even become completely, so the whole population will move away unless something happens. And in some cases, urban migrants specifically chose to go to these places because they want to do something like new in a very remote place where they have like the chance to start more or less completely anew. And in some cases, this actually was very successful. So there is an art island, for example, which is very famous for art festivals and so on in Japan. Then there are some islands which are famous for ecotourism, where most of the population that's still there is actually like urban migrants who just like scuba diving or I don't know what, and they like stay there and offer their services for tourists from the urban centers of the country. So we can see like examples like that. Hokkaido, as you mentioned, it is a bit special even within Japan because it used not to be populated that much like 200 years ago. So it's quite the frontier more or less of Japan, and they colonized it more or less. So it's again a different story, and it's very difficult. But even in places like Hokkaido or other places in Japan, there are programs where the national government actually funds young people from the urban centers to move to these places and try out some projects. So the idea is that in the end, they fund these projects for 3 years. And in the end, they hope that the people become eventually successful and stayed in these areas. And I think 30% or something of these initiatives are successful, and then these newcomers stay at these places. And it's always these remote places because otherwise you don't get the funding. So there are ideas of how to cope with that situation, but I don't want to be too optimistic. There are, of course, also cases in Japan where the whole villages get lost, more or less, in that sense, so that nobody lives there anymore. I have visited such places, and I think some more might emerge, but it really depends on what the others, what Bettina and Blanca already said, that it really depends also on the infrastructure and also on young people on site and whether they have the energy necessary for really like establishing new structures and also attracting new population. I've seen a case where one young woman like opened a Wald kindergarten, a forest kindergarten, a Danish concept of it, like a free kindergarten where you play in nature. And she was so successful that so many other mothers throughout Japan chose to relocate to this small village because they wanted to educate or have their children educated in a natural environment. So in that sense, this very remote like locality was attractive again for newcomers. So it really depends on the people on site and also on as I said, the administration that supports such projects.
Thank you so much. At the moment, I don't see any hands, and we nearly are running out of time. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to me to have Bettina, Blanca, and Sebastian with us in this afternoon. Thanks, Sebastian, for staying awake during our session. It was a great pleasure to have you here from Tokyo. And I have to say, I had to restrain myself several times not to jump into the discussion by myself. So it was really a pleasure.